This week in game news, it was announced that Lucky's Tale would come with every Oculus Rift for free. Acclaim's sci-fi skateboarding game Trickstyle was re-released on GOG for Windows, just in time seeing as Descent was removed from GOG on account of Interplay's failure to honor a royalty agreement with Parallax. Hajime Tabata, director of Final Fantasy XV, confirmed that the game would be released in 2016. 1080 Degree Snowboarding was re-released on the Wii U eShop this week, and frankly, this was a slow week for game news, so in addition to what interesting news did happen this week, we'll also have a nice look back at 10 good games from 2015, games that you might have missed. This is the Blackman and Robin Game News Update. In-game releases this week, Jet Set Knights hit Steam Early Access. It looks pretty neat. It's a retro-styled co-op platformer with some pretty pixel art and a promising trailer. At the time of production, however, nobody on Steam has bothered reviewing it, hence I can't really say if it's a good game or not. Will you be the first? The game is also set to be released on Mac and Linux at some point in time, but for now it's Windows only. A new trailer has been released for a game called Snow Horse, and it looks silly? I don't know what to say about it at all. Really, Snow Horse might be the most bizarre thing I've ever shown on this show. The game is inexplicably coming to the PC and Xbox One. On Steam Greenlight this week is a game called Conga Master, which was originally created in 3 days for Ludum Dare. Apparently, the developers have plans to create a bigger and more fully fleshed out Conga simulator than the one they have now. I got the chance to play the game, and yes, it is just as silly as you might anticipate, but it's also surprisingly fun. Your goal is to dance around the room, picking up people for your conga line. If you bump into somebody, they suddenly lose interest. Also, there are literal pigs on the dance floor. You don't want them interested in your conga line. Hopefully, the finished game features the music of Gloria Estefan, but I can't confirm or deny anything about that right now. Regarding last week's Steam fiasco, in case you missed the news, there was a serious caching issue that was later revealed to be the fault of a DOS, or denial of service attack, on Valve servers. This caching issue caused users to see each other's personal information. PayPal email addresses, names, in some cases telephone numbers and real-life addresses, as well as the last few digits of some folks' credit card numbers. This breach of information affected many thousands of users, but from the looks of things, this information wasn't stolen, just passed between a couple of users. It took Valve an abysmal amount of time to issue an official statement regarding this incident to their users. There was no word of any recourse for any users who have had their personal information compromised. That's not a good sign. I'm disappointed that this happened, but mostly I'm disappointed in Valve for their response. They shut down the servers, which was smart, but they didn't say anything. Their customers were running scared, and there were no official instructions from them as to what should be done, or information as to what was going on. That the statement came days after the incident speaks volumes about Valve's dreadful public relations, which have always been their weakness. In this case, it turned a bad situation into a disaster. A week later, the internet seems to have largely forgotten about the fiasco in the first place, which is fortunate for Valve, but does not set a good precedent. What happens when a disaster escalates into a full-blown catastrophe? What happens when it all doesn't blow over and users get angry and start leaving? Valve needs to start communicating with the community it has, or else risk losing it altogether. While we're talking about Steam, I suppose I'm obligated to mention that the ongoing winter Steam sale has been rather dull. That is, up until this week. As it turns out, there's some sort of alternate reality game in progress right now. Accessing the Steam store via a web browser and typing the word search into the search bar causes a dialog box to open in your browser. Some ardent Redditors have been hard at work trying to figure out the cryptic clues that Valve has scattered around their site, sometimes in plain sight. You can find out more about this at reddit.com/r/Steam Sale Detectives. Also, just a hint, if you'd like to unlock the Red Herring badge, head to the page for Ikaruga and type in 1V7531 into the box after you type in search. At the outset, we mentioned that the Oculus Rift would ship with a free copy of Lucky's Tale, which is not a first-person VR game but a platformer. A rather unusual genre for virtual reality, it works surprisingly well. The reason we mention this again is because while you'll be getting Lucky's Tale, regrettably you won't be able to use your fancy Oculus Touch controllers with it, because those have been delayed to the second half of 2016. Personally, I'm a bit disappointed by this because the Touch is going to be a very important peripheral for the Rift. It's a controller designed specifically for virtual reality. While keyboards and mice work, and ordinary controllers are great, none of these are really designed around the experience of being completely immersed in virtual environments. The reason for the delay is, of course, for the sake of finishing the controllers so that they'll work right when they ship. My main concern is that they'll wind up insufficiently supported and end up like the Kinect, another great peripheral with minimal support. Or maybe this won't happen at all. Time shall tell. This isn't all the virtual reality news we have, however. It turns out that Samsung will be revealing Rink during this year's CES, or Consumer Electronics Show. Rink is what they're referring to as an advanced hand motion controller for mobile VR devices. Rink looks to be the mobile equivalent of the Oculus Touch. We'll be watching CES this January for more information on it. Mobile VR has been taking off as of late, with Samsung leading the charge with their own Gear VR system. Looking at the pre-released images of the Rink, it seems to track individual finger movements and positions, much like the Oculus Touch. Also worth noting is that the Rink relies on an extra device that goes atop your Gear VR. Hopefully, it gets good support from developers. That said, I'm not gonna lie, this thing looks kinda goofy. In JRPG news, Square Enix has announced that Final Fantasy IX is coming to iOS, Android, and PC. There's no word on when exactly it's coming, but it's nice to hear that it's being re-released. In case you're unfamiliar with it, Final Fantasy IX is a return to form for the series, leaving behind the more modern trappings of 7 and 8 for a more fantasy steampunk world, the sort that we traditionally associate with Final Fantasy. It's widely regarded as one of the best and least appreciated Final Fantasy games. Right now, there's no telling if Square Enix is actually going to do a good job on the port, however. Seeing as they've done rather lazy ports of games in the past, it may be worth waiting to see how this one turns out. In PlayStation 4 news, hacking group Fail Overflow has successfully cracked the PlayStation 4. They've managed to get Sony's latest console to run Linux. The older models of the PlayStation 3 were quite capable of running Linux as well. It was something that Sony permitted for a period of time, but something that Sony eventually took away. Groups like Fail Overflow have been returning power to the hands of users, which is great. Fail Overflow has also shown off the machine running a Game Boy emulator, because there's nothing funnier than playing Pokemon on your PlayStation. A new video showing off the upcoming Rain World has been released. It reveals the world map, shows off more gameplay, and a couple other little things. We still don't know when exactly Rain World will be coming out, but from the looks of things, it'll likely be quite soon. 2015 had a lot of big, great games. What made it a particularly good year for gaming was that, in addition to great sequels to loved franchises, there were also some really cool original games. Many of these great new games found popularity on account of their design, their aesthetic, and their storytelling. That said, I feel that there were a lot of cool games that got overlooked. Here are 10 games that you might have missed. These 10 games are presented in no particular order, they're just games that I enjoyed that I feel deserved more attention. This isn't an in-depth look at these games. Rather, if you're looking for that, you can read our reviews at blackmanandrobin.com for some of them. These are just 10 quick recommendations. Number 1. SteamWorld Heist. Released in December, SteamWorld Heist is a turn-based strategy platformer in which you have a team of steampunk robots, and it's up to you to steal stuff in order to save the solar system. The game is very different from SteamWorld Dig, mind you. Even though it's set in the same universe, it takes place during a very different time, and it has very different gameplay. If you're a fan of Fire Emblem or XCOM, you'll have some idea of what to expect with SteamWorld Heist. On the whole, it's a great game with plenty of character, humor, and lots of replayability. At the time of this video's production, SteamWorld Heist is only available on the Nintendo 3DS. That said, the developers are working on bringing the game to other platforms. Number 2. Centris. Centris defies the genre conventions of music games. It's not a game that you can lose, but it is possible to make some really ugly sounding, or some really great, or some truly strange music with Centris. Essentially, there's a spinning disc and you have to drop chunks of music onto it. Drum samples, notes, little riffs. You have to fill certain spots on the disc in order to proceed with the song. The thing is, you have an unprecedented amount of freedom in filling these spots, so choose carefully. The resulting looped song could be awful or awesome. If you like what you make, you can export it and put it on your mixtape. We claim no responsibilities for fires caused by mixtapes. Centris is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Number 3 is Concrete Jungle. Concrete Jungle is one of the most unusual games I've played this year. At first glance, it seems like a city-building game. Upon closer examination, however, it's revealed that Concrete Jungle is really a turn-based strategy game with deck building and a city-building theme. Your goal is to fill rows with buildings and collect points using point-collecting properties, namely residences. Some buildings, such as factories, will reduce property values. Other buildings will raise them, and it's up to you to bring your property values up as high as you can. In the multiplayer mode, you must beat your opponent's property values, and whoever has the highest property value at the end of the game wins. If this sounds familiar, it may be because the game is very similar to Megacity, which was created by the same developer, Cole Powered Games, but it was released on the Xbox Live Indie Game Marketplace as well as on iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. Megacity is the much simpler predecessor to Concrete Jungle, and it's also a lot of fun. So while I'm mostly recommending Concrete Jungle because of its unique gameplay, character, and aesthetic, if you find that you enjoy the gameplay of Concrete Jungle and would like to play more of it perhaps on your mobile device or on your Android-powered Remix Mini, where the game works surprisingly well with a mouse, you should also check out Megacity. Concrete Jungle is available for Windows.
I always knew Tin Roof had a rotten core. I just never thought I'd actually find...
Number 4, Hot Tin Roof. Film noir is an aesthetic that isn't often employed in video games. Sure, there's LA Noire, but when's the last time you played a Metroidvania with detective work, a gun that shoots bubbles, a cute cat companion, and a silly sense of humor? It's all present in Hot Tin Roof, and if you're in the market for a fun platformer with great writing, innovative gameplay, and a game that is, at its heart, a film noir-style story, play Hot Tin Roof. Hot Tin Roof is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Number 5, Discourse. Discourse was one of the stranger games I've played this year. It's an adventure game that plays a bit like a choose-your-own-adventure book. While I was initially underwhelmed by the game, it's one that I came to love through multiple playthroughs. The premise of Discourse is that you've crash-landed on a seemingly deserted island with a group of survivors. You do your best to lead them, and you have to make decisions. Will you run into the storm after a survivor makes a bad decision? There's a wildcat ready to pounce. Will you try to fight it or escape? Discourse doesn't just have good replayability, but it's really designed around multiple playthroughs. You're supposed to play it again and again in order to try and save different folks. The magic of Discourse is in its writing and characters, because while this sounds like it would get very repetitive, the characters begin to grow on you after each playthrough. You learn new things about them and discover that they're deeper than you initially thought. Discourse is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Number 6, Axiom Verge. Axiom Verge is the one game on this list that I haven't yet played, but it's one that I've heard enough about to feel safe recommending. Axiom Verge is a Metroidvania platformer in which you play as a scientist named Trace who finds himself on an alien world. Naturally, you have to try and fight to survive. It's a love letter to the original Metroid games. No, not Metroid Prime, and no, definitely not Other M. The original Metroid and Super Metroid for the NES and SNES, respectively, are what influenced the game's creator, Tom Happ. If you loved the original Metroid games, you'll definitely want to check out Axiom Verge, which is available for Windows, Mac, Linux, and PlayStation 4. Number 7 on our list is Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball. The game, with quite possibly the most ridiculous name, Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball is a fast-paced multiplayer FPS that is what it says on the box. You're playing dodgeball as a robot in a disco. The thing is, there's much more to the game than that. There's a glut of creative and original modes, so in addition to the old-school FPS standards, namely free-for-all, TDM, etc., There are the original modes, such as Hoops, which is like basketball, except you might explode, and there are these crazy power-ups, and a mode in which your goal is to take out your robotic opponents as stylishly as possible. You haven't lived until you've scored bonus points for taking out a robot with a dodgeball from high above. There's an insane variety of things to do in the game, and it is truly awesome. The developer does a good job keeping the game updated, something that the game's friendly community enjoys. So while Splatoon gets all the attention for being an original shooter, and that it is, Disco Dodgeball certainly deserves to be checked out if you're looking for something unique. Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Number 8 is Celestian Tales Old North. Celestian Tales feels like an old-fashioned RPG, and that's because it largely is one mechanically. There is not much to the gameplay to set it apart as special, and while the visuals are nice, they're just nice. So why has a seemingly average JRPG-styled game made it into our top 10? Not on account of its notably fantastic soundtrack, but for its ambitious story. Undertale took home all the praise this year for employing morality and putting it at the heart of its story. While Undertale rightly received such praise, Celestian Tales has unfortunately been overlooked for covering other themes as well. In Celestian Tales, however, it's more a matter of duty versus honor. Will going through your lawful duty stand in the way of your own moral code? Are you really the good guy just because you're following the rules? While the game is relatively brief for a JRPG, it invites multiple playthroughs as different characters. It's worth checking out and is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Our 9th game is Volume. Another heist game, Volume has heavy stealth leanings. You can't take any violent actions in Volume against the robot guards who patrol the corridors of the corrupt, powerful wealthy who stole away the country. You play as a sort of Robin Hood figure, solving puzzles in what seems to be some sort of simulation. Through the story, it becomes apparent that you're streaming these virtual heists in order to show people how to take back their country. It's an interesting cyberpunk story, and I really like the characters in Volume. While some folks have understandably lamented the seemingly stupid AI of robotic opponents in the game, Volume's not so much a game about solving stealth puzzles smartly, so much as getting through the mazes quickly. It feels much more arcadey than other stealth games, and in my opinion that's quite cool. Volume is available for Windows, Mac, PlayStation 4, as well as the PlayStation Vita. Our 10th game is Technobabylon. The last of our top 10 games, Technobabylon is also a cyberpunk adventure involving crime, but that's where the similarity to Volume ends. Technobabylon is much darker and more serious, and it's a point-and-click adventure game. In Technobabylon, you play as 3 different characters. The old, hard-boiled detective, Charlie Regis, who's not a big fan of the seemingly omniscient AI that watches his city and predicts crime. Then there's Max Lau, his spunky partner with a seedy past. And, of course, there's Lafa Sesame, an ordinary citizen who spends her days jacked into the equivalent of the Matrix, and who finds herself in the middle of a deadly conspiracy involving a mysterious and murderous mind hacker. Technobabylon handles its themes of transhumanism and mass surveillance adeptly. It has great voice acting and an engrossing story. You can get Technobabylon on Windows, and it's worth noting that it's not at all a demanding game technically speaking. According to the system requirements, it runs on Windows ME and only calls for 64 megabytes of RAM. Of course, these weren't the only good games released in 2015. There were many others worth a look that we'll be going through quickly. Here are the honorable mentions. To start with, Citizens of Earth. Now, Citizens of Earth is a wacky RPG in which you play as the Vice President of Planet Earth. You're a bit of a doofus, and only your mother really loves you. But that's no matter, as she'll help you find off protesters, hippies, and other folks who hate you. You'll pick up allies along the way, such as your brother and a barista. It's weird fun, and it's available for Windows, PS4, PlayStation Vita, Wii U, and 3DS. Next is Dr. Langeskov, the Tiger, and the Terribly Cursed Emerald, a whirlwind heist. The third heist game on our list, and the winner of the Most Ridiculous Name of the Year award, Dr. Langeskov is very short and hard to describe without spoiling. It is, however, safe to say that it's the same sort of game about games that the Stanley Parable falls into. That makes sense when you realize that the Stanley Parable's creator is actually behind it. While the game is very short, it comes at the very low price of free. You can get it for Mac and Windows. Cosmocoria is a very weird game. You play as a baby in space with a laser and some seeds. Your goal is to bring life to a dying solar system by floating from rock to rock, fighting hostile aliens and planting these seeds. The more you plant, the harder the enemies become to fight. It's a weird blend of surrealism and arcadey gameplay. It's like Asteroids had an open-world baby with agricultural roots. Cosmocoria is available for Mac, Linux, and Windows. Our next honorable mention goes to Curse of Isios. Curse of Isios is a short, retro-styled platformer with Hellenic roots. Inspired by Greek mythology, you play as a fisherman who's out to rescue his daughter. Greek mythology is not the only source of inspiration for the game, however. The stop-motion creations of Ray Harryhausen also played a part. The game is brief, free, and available for Windows from localmelito.com. Planet of the Eyes is another brief platformer. I'll be honest, Planet of the Eyes left me a little bit disappointed in the end. I felt that while the game was aesthetically perfect, the story of a robot lost on a bizarre and beautiful planet, picking up clues as to the nature of its existence through audio diaries, while interesting and well-written, would have really benefited from being better expanded upon. Additionally, the gameplay presented neat puzzles that never seemed to grow in intensity. This really stunted the game's sense of progression, but in spite of it, Planet of the Eyes is good enough to recommend for its visuals and interesting, if bare-bones, story. It's out for Mac and Windows. Oases is another free game, and it's the shortest on our list. It's about the creator's grandfather whose plane disappeared in 1960 during the Algeria Independence War. It's a beautiful abstract thing that's meant to be experienced a few times as you soar around colorful, surreal dreamscapes for a couple minutes at a time. You can get it for free for Mac and Windows from armelgibson.itch.io/oases. The last game on our list today is The Swindle. The Swindle is also a heist game. Was 2015 the year of the heist? I haven't the authority to say, but I feel safe saying that The Swindle is worth checking out. It's a game about busting into buildings, hacking computers, nabbing the loot, and getting out. The game employs procedural generation, which isn't completely unusual for a heist game. See SteamWorld Heist for details. But it's also largely a stealth game, meaning that sometimes procedural generation will work in your favor, other times it will cause you trouble, and you'll have to be able to think quickly in order to compensate for a puzzle that you might only see once, which is pretty cool. It's a steampunk heist game of improvisation, and it's worth checking out. You can get The Swindle for Mac and Windows. Well, these are just a few cool games from 2015 that I think a lot of folks missed. Were there any games that you think I missed? Hit us up on Twitter at Blackman and Robin, and be sure to follow us for all the latest game news, reviews, previews, and interviews. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views, and check out our site, blackmanandrobin.com, for reviews of some of the games from today's list.